Chapter 33, Our Route Reversed. Here ends what I call my journal of our voyage on board the raft, which journal was happily saved from the wreck. I proceed with my narrative as I did before I commenced my daily notes. What happened when the terrible shock took place, when the raft was cast upon the rocky shore, it would be impossible for me to say now. I felt myself precipitated violently into the boiling waves, and if I escaped from a certain and cruel death, it was wholly owing to the determination of the faithful Hans, who, clutching me by the arm, saved me from the yawning abyss. The courageous Icelander then carried me in his powerful arms far out of the reach of the waves and laid me down upon a burning expanse of sand, where I found myself sometimes afterwards in the company of my uncle the professor. Then he quietly returned towards the fatal rocks against which the furious waves were beating in order to save any stray waifs from the wreck. This man was always practical and thoughtful. I could not utter a word. I was quite overcome with emotion. My whole body was broken and bruised with fatigue. It took hours before I was anything like myself. Meanwhile, there fell a fearful deluge of rain, drenching us to the skin. Its very violence, however, proclaimed the approaching end of the storm. Some overhanging rocks afforded us a slight protection from the torrents. Under this shelter, Hans prepared some food, which, however, I was unable to touch, and, exhausted by the 3 weary days and nights of watching, we fell into a deep and painful sleep. My dreams were fearful, but at last exhausted nature asserted her supremacy, and I slumbered. Next day, when I awoke, the change was magical. The weather was magnificent. Air and sea, as if by mutual consent, had regained their serenity. Every trace of the storm, even the faintest, had disappeared. I was saluted on my awakening by the first joyous tones I had heard from the professor for many a day. His gaiety, indeed, was something terrible. "Well, my lad," he cried, rubbing his hands together, "have you slept soundly?" Might it not have been supposed that we were in the old house on the uh, Coin Konigstrasse, that I had just come down quietly to my breakfast, and that my marriage with Gretchen was to take place that very day? My uncle's coolness was exasperating. Alas, considering how the tempest had driven us in an easterly direction, we had passed under the whole of Germany, under the city of Hamburg, where I had been so happy, under the very street which contained all I loved and cared for in the world. It was a positive fact that I was only separated from her by a distance of 40 leagues, but these 40 leagues were of hard, impenetrable granite. All these dreary and miserable reflections passed through my mind before I attempted to answer my uncle's question. "Why, what is the matter?" he cried. "Can you not say whether you have slept well or not?" "I have slept very well," was my reply, "but every bone in my body aches. I suppose that will lead to nothing." "Nothing at all, my boy. It is only the result of the fatigue of the last few days, that is all." "You appear, if I may be allowed to say so, to be in a very jolly mood this morning," I said. "Delighted, my dear boy, delighted. Was never happier in my life. We have at last reached the wished-for port." "The end of our expedition?" cried I, in a tone of considerable surprise. "No, but to the confines of that sea which I began to fear would never end, but go round the whole world. We will now tranquilly resume our journey by land, and once again endeavor to dive into the center of the earth." "My dear uncle," I began, in a hesitating kind of way, "allow me to ask you one question." "Certainly, Harry. A dozen, if you think proper." "One will suffice. How about getting back?" I asked. "How about getting back? What a question to ask! We have not as yet reached the end of our journey." "I know that. All I want to know is how you propose we shall manage the return voyage." "In the most simple manner in the world," said the imperturbable professor. Once we reach the exact center of the sphere, either we shall find a new road by which to ascend to the surface, or we shall simply turn around and go back by the way we came. I have every reason to believe that while we are traveling forward, it will not close behind us. Then one of the first matters to see to will be to repair the raft, was my rather melancholy response. Of course, we must attend to that above all things, continued the professor. Then comes the all-important question of provisions, I urge. Have we anything like enough to enable us to accomplish such amazing designs as you contemplate carrying out? I have seen into the matter, and my answer is in the affirmative. Hans is a very clever fellow, and I have reason to believe that he has saved the greater part of the cargo. But the best way to satisfy your scruples is to come and judge for yourself. Saying which, he led the way out of the kind of open grotto in which we had taken shelter. I had almost begun to hope that which I should rather have feared, and this was the impossibility of such a shipwreck leaving even the slightest sign of what it had carried as freight. I was, however, thoroughly mistaken. As soon as I reached the shores of this inland sea, I found Hans standing gravely in the midst of a large number of things laid out in complete order. My uncle wrung his hands with deep and silent gratitude. His heart was too full for speech. This man, whose superhuman devotion to his employers I not only never saw surpassed, nor even equaled, had been hard at work all the time we slept, and at the risk of his life had succeeded in saving the most precious articles of our cargo. Of course, under the circumstances, we necessarily experienced several severe losses. Our weapons had wholly vanished, but experience had taught us to do without them. The provision of powder had, however, remained intact, after having narrowly escaped blowing us all to atoms in the storm. Well, said the professor, who was now ready to make the best of everything, as we have no guns, all we have to do is to give up the idea of hunting. Yes, my dear sir, we can do without them, but what about all of our instruments? Here's the manometer, the most useful of all, and which I gladly accept in lieu of the rest. With it alone, I can calculate the depth as we proceed. By its means alone, I shall be able to decide when we have reached the center of the earth. Ha ha ha! But for this little instrument, we might make a mistake and run risk of coming out at the antipodes. All this was said amid bursts of unnatural laughter. But the compass, I cried. Without that, what can we do? Here it is, safe and sound, he cried with real joy. Ah, and here we have the chronometer and the thermometer. Hans the Hunter is indeed an invaluable man. It was impossible to deny this fact. As far as the nautical and other instruments were concerned, nothing was wanting. Then, on further examination, I found ladders, cords, pickaxes, crowbars, and shovels all scattered about on the shore. There was, however, finally the most important question of all, and that was provisions. But what are we to do for food? I asked. Let us see to the commissariat department, replied my uncle gravely. The boxes which contain our supply of food for the voyage were placed in the row along the strand, and were in a capital state of preservation. The sea, in its every case, respected their contents, and summed up in one sentence, taking into consideration biscuits, salt, meat, Schiedam, and dried fish, we could still calculate on having about 4 months' supply if used with prudence and caution. 4 months, cried the sanguine professor in high glee. Then we shall have plenty of time to go and to come, and with what remains, I undertake to give my grand dinner to my colleagues of the Johanneum. I sighed. I should by this time have become used to the temperament of my uncle, and yet this man astonished me more and more every day. He was the greatest human enigma I had ever known. Now, before we do anything else, we must lay in stock of fresh water. The rain has fallen in abundance and filled the hollows of the granite. There is a rich supply of water, and we have no fear of suffering from thirst. which is our circumstances, which in our circumstances is of the last importance. As for the raft, I shall recommend Hans to repair it to the best of his abilities, though I have every reason to believe we shall not require it again." "How is that?" I cried, more amazed than ever at my uncle's style of reasoning. "I have an idea, my boy. It is none other than this simple fact. We shall not come out by the same opening as that by which we entered." I began to look at my uncle with vague suspicion. An idea had more than once taken possession of me, and this was that he was going mad. And yet, little did I think how true and prophetic his words were doomed to be. "And now," he said, "having seen to all these matters of detail, to breakfast." I followed him to a sort of projecting cape, after he had given his last instruction to our guide. In this original position, with dried meat, biscuit, and a delicious cup of tea, we made a satisfactory meal, I must say one of the most welcome and pleasant I ever remember. Exhaustion, the keen atmosphere, the state of calm after so much agitation, all contributed to give me an excellent appetite. Indeed, it contributed very much to producing a pleasant and cheerful state of mind. While breakfast was in hand, and between the sips of warm tea, I asked my uncle if he had any idea of how we now stood in relation to the world above. "For my part, I think it will be rather difficult to determine." "Well, if we were compelled to fix the exact spot," said my uncle, "it might be difficult, since during the 3 days of that awful tempest I could keep no account either of the quickness of the pace or of the direction in which the raft was going. Still, we will endeavor to approximate to the truth. We shall not, I believe, be so very far out." "Well, if I recollect rightly," I replied, "our last observation was made at the Geyser Island." "Harry's Island, my boy, Harry's Island. Do not decline the honor of having named it, given your name to an island discovered by us, the first human beings who trod it since the creation of the world." "Let it be so, then. At Harry's Island we had already gone over 270 leagues of sea, and we were, I believe, about 600 leagues more or less from Iceland." "Good! I am glad to see that you remember so well. Let us start from that point, and let us count 4 days of storm, during which our rate of traveling must have been very great. I should say that our velocity must have been about 80 leagues to the 24 hours. I agreed that I thought this is a fair calculation. There were then 300 leagues to be added to the grand total. Uh, yes, and the Central Sea must extend at least 600 leagues from side to side. Do you know, my boy Harry, that we have discovered an inland lake larger than the Mediterranean?" "Certainly, and we only know of its extent in one way. It may be hundreds of miles in length." "Very likely. Then," said I, after calculating for some minutes, "if your previsions are right, we are at this moment exactly under the Mediterranean itself." "Do you think so?" "Yes, I am almost certain of it. Are we not 900 leagues distant from the Reykjavik?" "That is perfectly true, and a famous bit of road we have traveled, my boy. But why should we be under the Mediterranean more than under Turkey or the Atlantic Ocean? Can can only be known when we are sure of not having deviated from our course, and of this we know nothing." "I do not think we were driven very far from our course. The wind appears to me to have always been about the same. My opinion is that the shore must be situated to the southeast of the Port Gretchen." "Good, I hope so. It will, however, be easy to decide the matter by taking the bearings from our departure by means of the compass. Come along, and we will consult that invaluable invention." The professor now walked eagerly in the direction of the rock where the indefatigable Hans had placed the instruments in safety. My uncle was gay and light-hearted. He rubbed his hands and assumed all sorts of attitudes. He was to all appearance once more a young man. Since I had known him, never had he been so amiable and pleasant. I followed him, rather curious to know whether I had made any mistake in my estimation of our position. As soon as we reached the rock, my uncle took the compass, placed it horizontally before him, and looked keenly at the needle. As he had at first shaken it to give it vivacity, it oscillated considerably, and then slowly assumed its right position under the influence of the magnetic power. The professor bent his eyes curiously over the wondrous instrument. A violent start immediately showed the extent of his emotion. He closed his eyes, rubbed them, and took another and keener survey. Then he turned slowly round to me, stupefaction depicted on his countenance. "What's the matter?" said I, beginning to be alarmed. He could not speak. He was too overwhelmed for words. He simply pointed to the instrument. I examined it eagerly according to the mute directions, and a loud cry of surprise escaped my lips. The needle of the compass pointed due north in the direction we expected was the south. It pointed to the shore instead of to the high seas. I shook the compass. I examined it with a curious and anxious eye. It was in its state of perfection. No blemish in any way explained the phenomenon. Whatever position we forced the needle into, it returned invariably to the same unexpected point. It was useless attempting to conceal from ourselves the fatal truth. There could be no doubt about it. Unwelcome as was the fact that during the tempest there had been a sudden slant of wind, of which we had been unable to take any account, and thus the raft had carried us back to the shores we had left, apparently forever, so many days before. Chapter 34. A Voyage of Discovery. It would be altogether impossible for me to give any idea of the utter astonishment which overcame the professor on making this extraordinary discovery. Amazement, incredulity, and rage were blended in such a way as to alarm me. During the whole course of my life I had never seen a man at first so chapfallen and then so furiously indignant. The terrible fatigues of our sea voyage, the fearful danger we had passed through, had all gone for nothing. We had to begin them all over again. Instead of progressing, as we fondly expected during the voyage of so many days, we had retreated. Every hour of our expedition on the raft had been so much lost time. Presently, however, the indomitable energy of my uncle overcame every other consideration. "So," he said, between his set teeth, "fatality will play me these terrible tricks. The elements themselves conspire to overwhelm me with mortification. Air, fire, and water combine their united efforts to oppose my passage. Well, they shall see what the earnest will of a determined man can do. I will not yield. I will not retreat even 1 inch, and we shall see who shall triumph in this great contest, man or nature." Standing upright on a rock, irritated and menacing, Professor Hardwigg, like the ferocious Ajax, seemed to defy the fates. I, however, took upon myself to interfere and to impose some sort of check upon such insatiate enthusiasm. "Listen to me, uncle," I said, in a firm but temperate tone of voice. "There must be some limit to ambition here below. It is utterly useless to struggle against the impossible. Pray, listen to reason. We are utterly unprepared for a sea voyage. It is simple madness to think of performing a journey of 500 leagues upon a wretched pile of beams, with a counterpane for a sail, a paltry stick for a mast, and a tempest to contend with. As we are totally incapable of steering our frail craft, we shall become the mere plaything of the storm, and it is acting the part of madmen if we a second time run any risk upon this dangerous and treacherous central sea. There are only a few of the reasons, these are only a few of the reasons and arguments I put together, reasons and arguments which to me appeared unanswerable. I was allowed to go on without interruption for about 10 minutes. The explanation to this I soon discovered. The professor was not even listening, and did not hear a word of all my eloquence. "To the raft!" he cried in a hoarse voice when I paused for a reply. Such was the result of my strenuous effort to resist his iron will. I tried again. I begged and implored him. I got into a passion. But I had to deal with a will more determined than my own. I seemed to feel like the waves which fought and battled against the huge mass of granite at our feet, which had smiled grimly for so many ages at their puny efforts. Hans, meanwhile, without taking part in our discussion, had been repairing the raft. One would have supposed that he instinctively guessed at the further projects of my uncle. By means of some fragment of cordage, he had again made the raft seaworthy. While I had been speaking, he had hoisted a new mast and sail, the latter already fluttering and waving in the breeze. The worthy professor spoke a few words to our imperturbable guide, who immediately began to put our baggage on board and to prepare for our departure. The atmosphere was now tolerably clear and pure, and the northeast wind blew steadily and serenely. It appeared likely to last for some time. It appeared likely to last for some time. What then could I do? Could I undertake to resist the iron will of two men? It was simply impossible if even I could have hoped for the support of Hans. This, however, was out of the question. It appeared to me that the Icelander had set aside all personal and a will and identity. He was a picture of abnegation. I could hope for nothing from one so infatuated and with and devoted to his master. All I could do, therefore, was to swim with the stream. In a mood of stolid and sullied resignation, I was about to take my accustomed place on the raft when my uncle placed his hand upon my shoulder. "There is no hurry, my boy," he said. "We shall not start until tomorrow." I looked the picture of resignation to the dire will of fate. "Under the circumstances," he said, "I ought to neglect no precautions. As fate hath cast me upon these shores, I shall not leave without having completely examined them." In order to understand this remark, I must explain that though we had been driven back to the northeastern shore, we had landed at a very different spot from which had been our starting point. Port Gretchen must, we calculated, be very much to the westward. Nothing, therefore, was more natural and reasonable than that we should reconnoiter this new shore upon which we had so unexpectedly landed. "Let us go on a journey of discovery," I cried. And leaving Hans to his important operation, we started on our expedition. The distance between the foreshore at high water and foot of rocks was considerable. It would take about half an hour's walk to get from one to the other. As we trudged along, our feet crushed innumerable shells of every shape and size, once the dwelling place of animals of every period of creation. I particularly noticed some enormous shells, carapaces, turtle and tortoise species, the diameter of which exceeded 15 feet. They had in past ages belonged to those gigantic glyptodons of the Pliocene period, of which the modern turtle is about a minute specimen. In addition, the whole soil was covered by a vast quantity of stony relics, having the appearance of flint worn by the actions of the waves, and lying in successive layers one above the other. I came to the conclusion that in past ages the sea must have covered the whole district. Upon the scattered rocks now lying far beyond its reach, the mighty waves of ages had left evident marks on their passage. On reflection, this appeared to me partially to explain the existence of this remarkable ocean, 40 leagues below the surface of the earth's crust. According to my new and perhaps fanciful theory, this liquid mass must be gradually lost in the deep bowels of the earth. I had also no doubt that this mysterious sea was fed by infiltration of ocean above through imperceptible fissures. Nevertheless, it was impossible not to admit that these fissures must now be nearly choked up, for if not, the cavern, or rather the immense and stupendous reservoir, would have been completely filled in a short space of time. Perhaps even this water, having to contend against the accumulated subterraneous fires of the interior of the earth, had become partially vaporized. Hence the explanation of those heavy clouds suspended above our heads, and the superabundant display of electricity which occasioned such terrible storms in this deep and cavernous sea. The lucid explanation of the phenomena we had witnessed appeared to me quite satisfactory. However great and mighty the marvels of nature may seem to us, they are always to be explained by physical reasons. Everything is subordinate to some great laws of nature. It now appeared clear that we were walking upon some kind of sedimentary soil, formed like the soils of that period, so frequent on the surface of the globe by the subsidence of water. The professor, who was now in his element, carefully examined every rocky fissure. Let him only find an opening, and it directly became important to him to examine its depth. For a whole mile we followed the windings of the central sea, when suddenly an important change took place in the aspect of the soil. It seemed to have been rudely cast up, convulsionized, as it were, by a violent upheaving of the lower strata. In many places, hollows here and hillocks there attested great dislocations at some other period of the terrestrial mass. We advanced with great difficulty over the broken masses of granite mixed with flint, quartz, and alluvian deposits, when a large field, more even than a field, a plain of bones, appeared suddenly before our eyes. It looked like an immense cemetery, where generation after generation had mingled their mortal dust. Lofty barrows of early remains rose at intervals. They undulated away to the limits of the distant horizon and were lost in a thick and brown fog. On that spot, some 3 square miles in extent, we accumulated the whole history of animal life. Scarcely one creature upon the comparatively modern soil of the upper and inhabited world had not there existed. Nevertheless, we were drawn forward by an all-absorbing and impatient curiosity. Our feet crushed with a dry and crackling sound the remains of those prehistoric fossils for which the museums of great cities quarrel, even when they obtain only rare and curious morsels. 1,000 such naturalists as Cuvier would not have sufficed to recompose the skeletons of the organic beings which lay in this magnificent osseous collection. I was utterly confounded. My uncle stood for some minutes with his arms raised on high towards the thick granite vault which served us for the sky. His mouth was wide open, his eyes sparkled wildly behind his spectacles, which he had fortunately saved. His head bobbed up and down from side to side, while his whole attitude and mien expressed unbounded astonishment. He stood in the presence of an endless, wondrous, and inexhaustibly rich collection of antediluvian monsters piled up for his own private and peculiar satisfaction. Fancy, an enthusiastic lover of books, carried suddenly into the very midst of the famous library of Alexandria, burned by the sacrilege Omar, and which some miracle had restored to its pristine splendor. Such was something of the state of mind in which Uncle Hardwigg was now placed. For some time he stood thus, literally aghast at the magnitude of his discovery. But it was in even greater excitement when, darting wildly over this mass of organic dust, he caught up a naked skull and addressed me in a quivering voice. "Harry, my boy, Harry, this is a human head." "A human head, uncle?" I said, no less amazed and stupefied than himself. "Yes, nephew. Ah, Mr. Milne Edwards, ah, Mr. de Quatrefages, why are you not here where I am? I, Professor Hardwigg." There you go. Chapter 35, Discovery upon Discovery.
Discovery upon discovery.
So,
exciting things.
They made it nowhere. and again, Harry wanted to go back.
Yeah.
How many times is that guy going to try to go back?
I don't know. I think I'd be ready to go back too at this point. They've had a rough time the last little while there.
They found a human head. I wonder if that's Mr. Zach Newsom.
Yeah,
or something
could be.
else.
Yeah, maybe they'll discover a native tribe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows?